This video is sponsored by Skillshare.
I love walking into an art store, being surrounded by beautiful paints and brushes, gouaches, overpriced pencil sharpeners, talking to weirdos wearing thick framed glasses. It rejuvenates me. And I always see beautiful watercolor sets like this. I love a good watercolor painting, although I'm more of a digital man myself, but the real question is, will it Warhammer? I want to paint a Space Marine using nothing but watercolor paints. I want to see if it can be done. I want to learn how to watercolor paint, probably on a project that's inappropriate for watercolor paints, but I want to see what happens. And I want it to be good. I don't just want 3 colors and up, I want this model to sing. And I want it to look like it was painted with watercolor paints. That might seem like it'll obviously happen because I'm going to be using only watercolor paints, but I don't want to find a way to cheat and make this stuff act like my normal acrylic paints. I want it to look like a watercolor painting. And of course, all of this hinges on, is this actually possible? I've never tried this before. I have no idea if it'll work. And it could very easily all come crashing down around me. I have a very nice set of watercolor paints. I don't know what brand they are. I don't know what that says, but it was about 30 bucks, so these should be good paints. And I have a really spicy Space Marine for this project. This is a squad of Space Marines I kit bashed and converted way back in 2019. It's a kill team of space wolves who are on a top secret mission to scour the galaxy for any news on their missing Primarch Leman Russ. I was moving house at the time, and so I put them in a Ziploc baggie for safekeeping, and then I promptly lost them until today. I think one of these guys would make an excellent canvas to try out these watercolor paints on. I'm gonna paint this guy. Now, watercolors are transparent paints, and they're typically painted on white, thick, crunchy, absorbent paper. I can't really turn a miniature into that, but I can give them a white prime. That should give me the best chance of success. I was considering zenithaling the mini, but really I have no idea how this paint will behave. I know I can make things darker, I don't know how easily I can brighten things up. And the Space Wolves are bright colors already. This is the fun part of experimentation, right before you get started. No experience, just expectations. Ooh, that's how it always starts. Then comes running and screaming. Name the movie quote below. All right, let's see what happens. I dipped a drippy paintbrush into the light blue paint, and it soaked up the water quickly. I transferred it to a dry palette and did a bunch of swirls to make sure the paint and water was thoroughly mixed on the brush. Then, the moment of truth, I touched paint to miniature. It already cleared my first worry. I was really scared that it'd be hydrophobic and just beat up, but no, it stuck down into the primer okay. It was messy though. The paint is really watery, so it got a little runny and flowed into places I didn't want it to go. And the paint settles and changes color a little wet versus dry. Okay, it's doing something kind of interesting. It's a little bit like a wash flowing into the recesses, and it's really, really fragile. Any little bit of water immediately pulls all of the paint off of it. And it's not drying. There must be just ever so slightly a little bit of linseed oil in this paint. And so since there's no paper to absorb it, it's just sitting. I think I can figure this out. Probably. It is tricky to see the colors in the palette, as they're all darker than they really will be. What I thought was dark blue was actually blue. So I went with a different color blue and brown mixture to get a desaturated dark color to shade my Space Wolf's armor. This is the real test. How will these colors interact with each other? The darker color quickly overpowered the light color, and because I'm working in such small quantities, the paint pretty instantly mixes together. I wanted shade on the bottom of each armor panel, but really just ended up as a dark blue base coat. I used a clean damp brush to rehydrate and pull paint off the raised areas and wipe the pigments off on a paper towel. This worked really quickly, and I could be pretty accurate about the paint I removed and what I let stay. This is definitely a tricky way to paint. One thing that is nice though is I can take a damp brush and erase anything. On the armor, I did a light blue and then tried to apply a dark blue on top. I think for the yellow parts of the armor, I'm gonna try it in reverse and put a dark yellow on and then put a light yellow on top and see what happens. There is a lovely earth brown, a very tau color if you will, and this will be my dark. I even mixed in a little brown to darken it further, and I tried to leave less water so the paint went on with more coverage. I'm getting a little closer to the correct water ratio. The paint stuck on and was a little less runny, and then I came in with the bright yellow paint. It instantly mixed with the brown and made a decently smooth transition. Then I wiped most of the paint off my brush and began removing paint, letting the white primer show through with just a hint of yellow glaze. There is definitely something to this. Dark layer of paint, put on a light layer, they kind of mix together, and then you come back with the damp brush and wipe it away to that white primer. It's kind of like an oil wash. It's really, really interesting, and it's pretty easy to do. A little hard to control, but there's something to this.
I was shocked at how well the watercolors were working, and you know what else shocked me? All the incredible courses available at Skillshare. With Skillshare, I feel empowered to explore other areas I'm interested in. One of the classes I checked out recently was the Productivity and Time Management for Content Creators by Ali Abdal. When you're the type of person who needs to get 30 or 40 or 50 models painted in 24 hours or less like me, getting some of those masterclass tips and tricks offered in a course like this is a buff that's too good to pass up. Not to mention, there's almost a dozen other options to choose from in the category of time management. Skillshare has plenty of other options to choose from as well. I was thinking about adding a class on crafts to my learning queue next. If Skillshare sounds interesting to you, the first 1,000 people who use our link in the description below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Just follow that link and you can join the hundreds of thousands of members who are already signed up and engaging in achieving their future goals. These watercolors are getting me really excited now. I loaded up the brown and prepared it on my palette and then mixed in some black paint. This color has boots and belts written all over it. I laid it on even thicker than I did the yellow. It stuck right where I wanted it without running. And then I went in with a red-brown. And not even bothering with the palette, smeared this onto the front of his boots, mixing it with the brown and creating a transition, from dark brown to red to a cream color on the front of his boots and belt. I used Stynylrez white primer, which seems to create a layer with enough grit that the paint stains and will not 100% wipe away, which is good. I have to be a little more careful, but the paint works better. I did the purity seals next, and speaking of that grit, these purity seals are made of green stuff and must be a little smoother than Games Workshop plastic because the paint started to bead up. I think texture matters a lot, and maybe I should have painted over these with a matte paint before priming to give it just a little bit more grit for the watercolor to stick to. I still managed to get them painted and looking properly pure. Now for his chainmail and loincloth. This Marine is actually built out of the old Chaos Warriors box with Space Wolf's arms, shoulders, and a head. I'm finding I don't have to use the palette as much as I'm getting more used to the brush feel of saturating the watercolors just right. And similarly to how speed paint works, I painted the wolf's tails in 3 layers, gray, red, brown, and black, and then mixed them together. The paints mixed together a little more than I would have preferred, but I bet with a little practice I could get it just right. I mixed up the red as thick as I could to paint the wolf on his backpack, and with just the right amount of moisture, it behaves pretty much like a regular paint. This is going tremendously. I am very pleasantly surprised. I thought this would be a little bit like a gag, like painting a miniature with paints not meant for miniature painting, but this is going really well. It's working like I see oil paints working for other people, but I can never pull it off. The blending is going really well, wiping the paint away is going really well. Is it going to be able to paint really crispy weapons? I am excited to find out. This guy's got a chain sword and a bolt pistol. I think I want to try hazard stripes on the chain sword and a little ruby red accent on the bolt pistol. I touched down on the earth color paint with barely any moisture on my brush and then touched it to a paper towel to pull off even more moisture. Then I began working on these stripes. Using the paint like this lays it down nice and saturated, but also a little thick. It got the job done though. I went in with a watery yellow and blended this into the earth color and wiped away some paint, lightening these stripes up a little. Then I went in with a red, laying this down in between the yellow. Then I got cocky. I thought maybe a little water would blend the 2 colors just perfectly and make a fun watery color transition. Nope, the paint instantly mixed into red and I had to wipe it all away and start over. To darken the red, I put a drop of black paint on the edge of each stripe and then tapped the tip of the brush over these spots to get the red and the black paint to mix together. Now for the metallic parts. I mixed the white pigment and black pigments together to make a gray, and these 2 colors seem to behave a little differently. They had much better coverage than the other colors, and I had a little trouble wiping them away. I'll have to play around and find other combinations to get a good dark wash going, but it still got the job done. The handle painted perfectly though. 1 drop of watery brown and the chain sword was complete. Now for the bolt pistol. My gray mixture was still misbehaving a little. The pigments are probably slightly larger, so the transition from the edges to the larger surfaces were a little more stark than the colors. The red went on beautifully, and a watery brush pulled away the paint nicely to make lighter sections. This red seems to be sliding into magenta. It probably needs to be mixed a little with yellow or orange to keep the color warmer. And then the gold I painted just like the yellow armor. The weapons came out pretty good. The black paint seems to behave just a little bit differently than all the other colors. And I do notice ever so slightly some cracking on the thickest, most saturated parts of the paint job. I'm using the hairdryer a ton, so that could be causing the cracking, although I would tend to think it would happen regardless. I don't know if it's a deal breaker, but if they get any bigger, it might be. Now it's time for that face. Faces are hard to paint, but often I find myself struggling with acrylics because I'm not that good at blending, and this paint is impossible not to blend with, so this might actually be a bit easier. I made up a tan color and then touched some brown paint onto his eyes and cheeks, and they filled in nicely. Then my little trick for skin, magenta. I put this on the sides of his head and cheeks and they mixed in to create some nice warmth and make his skin look more alive, like a lovely shade of sunburn. Now all Space Wolves are Santa cosplayers, so I need a white beard, but not just pure white. I put gray over the beard and then pulled off most of the paint with a damp brush. It ended up more gray beard, but I can live with it. Maybe his facial hair just needs a shampoo. I made up watery colors for the head, but to freehand on the shoulders, I have to make thick paint that won't blend into the other colors already on the shoulder pad. I wiped away excess moisture on a paper towel and then got to work painting as straight a lines as I could. And it worked! They went down without disturbing the paint nearby.
I am loving the watercolor paints. The face turned out lovely, the freehanding was really nice. It wasn't easier than with normal acrylic paints because it's easy to be really precise and they dry so quickly. But I kind of messed up on the tip of all of those little triangles. So I just went back in with a damp brush and just cleaned those right up. It's like having an eraser. It's really, really interesting. And it's behaving a lot like oil paint, and so it should be perfect on the cape. I struggle with capes. I've been using contrast paint and speed paint to do them, but they always look really clean and plasticky, because they literally are clean and plasticky. But I bet watercolors work out great. I made up a slurry of brown and then gave the cape a solid coat. I'm finding that step 1 is always laying down thick solid coverage and then manipulating it later, the opposite of how you'd paint on paper, where you want to work up in layers. After the brown, I went in with a reddish-brown watery layer of paint, and this mixed with the brown, reactivating it, and I pulled it away with a damp brush. This made a nice textured, distressed-looking cloth, and I bet I could get it even better with more practice. Maybe smaller brushes would help as they hold less water. This is a cape made from the pelt of a wolf, so for the inside I want a pinkish brown, so I mixed together some white, earth, and red. And for whatever reason, this little corner of the cape was the only spot on the model that just would not accept paint. I don't know if it's finger grease, an extra shiny spot of plastic, or chaos shenanigans, but it would not accept paint. And you know what always cheers me up when my paint's not working? That's right, our Patreon. Over there we have a new terrain pack every month. This month we have the Gothic Modular Trenches, a customizable network of walkways with bits to make them suitable for Imperial or Chaos factions. You can pick up the whole set through the EOB terrain tier on our Patreon hosted through Comics Games and Things, or you can subscribe to our tribes over on My Mini Factory. When I highlighted the inside, I just pulled away paint until there was a transition in place between the primer color and that annoying little spot. The fur around his neck and shoulders got brown, and then this mini was almost done. I haven't noticed any new cracking of the paint on the miniatures since I stopped using the hairdryer, and I think it was the hairdryer's fault. Also on my dry palette, which is just the plasticky thing that came with the paint on here is way thicker than anywhere on the miniature, and there's absolutely no cracking, so I do think it was the hairdryer's fault. All paint shrinks just a little bit, and this paint, when I was blasting it with the heat, I think it was trying to constrict and there was just nowhere for it to constrict to, and so it just broke. So I'm pretty sure that I have solved the cracking problem, and because the paint is so fragile and it reactivates so easily, I bet I can fix the cracking that's already on the miniature. All along the sides of his legs, the paint cracked really bad, so I took a slightly moist brush and just patted the paint, which reactivated it and filled in the cracks. It's not perfect. It seems like with watercolors, you want to get it right the first time, but a little loss of smoothness is better than big ol' white cracks. I'll have to experiment though. I wonder if I could make cracks happen if I wanted them for effect. Yep, that fixed it right up. Now it is time for that base. And nothing is more perfect for watercolors than a landscape. This should be awesome. I slobbered blue all over the base. I want a cool, dark landscape, so step 1 is blue. Then a dark brown, then more blue, and then black. And you know what? It didn't actually work all that well. Every new layer of paint knocked off the old layer and blended them together a little too thoroughly and revealed some of the white primer. It's okay, but I'm gonna have to experiment more. Perhaps some matte medium would make the paint behave a little bit more like a wash. Now for some snow. I made up some snow out of Army Painter snow and plenty of clear Elmer's glue. You have to get the ratio just right on the glue versus snow powder so you can get past the cat turd phase and move nicely into the sticky, crunchy snow. Then I picked this up with an old paintbrush and touched it down on the mini. I don't know what I was thinking, but I guess I forgot that I was painting with watercolor paints because I made my favorite snow recipe and then I applied wet snow to watercolor paint. And so every time I put the brush down, the watercolor reactivated and mixed a little bit with the snow. I think it'll be fine. It'll just look a little bit like dirty snow. Thank goodness it's not yellow snow, but it'll be fine. Also, nobody get mad at me, but I'm gonna paint the base rim with normal black acrylic paint. I think I've proven that I can paint with watercolor paints. I don't wanna be here for the next hour trying to get a beautiful coat of watercolor black, so I'm gonna use normal acrylic paint for that base rim. I poured this right onto the dry palette, a whole mini painted with no wet palette, no paint medium, no washes or contrast paint. It was a really unique and new experience. I don't know if a black base rim is always necessary. I do like it when people mix it up and try different colors, but black base rims always look pretty good. Now stick around to the grand reveal because I'm gonna let this guy sit for about 8 hours and then I wanna try something to see if this watercolor paint is gonna become a permanent addition to my collection. I am blown away by the watercolor paints. I paint a ton. I have tried almost every paint range under the sun. I've done dumb experiments like apple barrel paints, which were actually sort of fine. Watercolor paints, I thought this would be an absolute train wreck. Paint that is activated by water, I thought everything would be so fragile, and it sort of is, but in a really, really good way. I enjoyed the spit out of this style of painting. It's really, really interesting. And I'm actually going to continue. Like, this isn't gonna be my standard style of painting. Like, standard acrylics are better for achieving like the results you want. They're very, very easy to use. They're very easy to control, where these are much harder to control. But man, was it a fun painting experience. If I was traveling to a friend's house to paint or going to a friendly local game store, I would be really tempted just to grab this and one brush. I painted this whole model with one brush. It's so easy. You don't have to figure out what colors you're gonna need, put all of those pots into a baggie, bring a water cup, bring your different mediums along. It just works. And the one thing that I did to see if this was absolutely feasible was I matte varnished this mini, and it worked fine. I thought maybe I got all the paints to lay exactly how I wanted them to, but they're always going to be incredibly fragile, and my Cheeto fingers are just gonna destroy the miniature. But the matte varnish stuck perfectly fine. All of that paint is trapped safely underneath it, and it's perfect. I am going to paint up the rest of the squad. I'm probably gonna do half of them with watercolor and half of them with normal acrylics, because I think I could get really good at this. I don't know if everybody needs to run out and get a watercolor paint set. It is different and tricky, and this guy took a fair bit of time to paint. He probably took about 5 hours to paint, although, you know, I was learning the process. I think I could get that time down a little bit. But I am very, very pleasantly surprised. Watercolor paints, thumbs up.